There's a dog on that roof." That's the first thing I said when I saw him. Perched like some sad little statue, a soaking mess of golden fur against the slate-gray shingles. The floodwaters had been rising for 3 days straight, and most of the neighborhood was either under evacuation orders or already empty. I had stayed behind. Part stubborn, part stupid, maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to leave behind what was left of my home. But there he was, this dog, crouched on the roof 2 houses down, staring out at the water like he was waiting for someone. My name's Ruthie Palmer, 67 years old, retired nurse and lifelong resident of Hollow Creek, Louisiana. My place sits a little higher than the others, so while most yards had turned into lakes, mine was still holding off the flood with sandbags and prayer. I was checking the street again, knee-deep in worry, when I spotted him. He wasn't barking. That's what struck me. Just watching. His fur was so soaked it clung to his skinny frame, and he looked more like a wet mop than anything else. I could just make out the shape of his ribs under his coat. That dog had been out there a while. It wasn't like I could run out there. The water between us was probably 5 feet deep, full of God knows what. The National Guard had been through earlier with a flat-bottom boat, shouting for people to come out if they needed rescue. I told them I was fine. But now there was this dog, and he wasn't fine. I ran inside and grabbed my binoculars from the kitchen drawer. When I looked through them, the image came sharp and clear. His eyes were focused, wide, alert, not wild, not feral, just waiting. That's the only word I could think of. Like he thought someone was still coming for him. I radioed the emergency line they'd left for us. Told them there was a stranded animal on 42 Oakley Street, roof of the Jenkins place. They logged the call, said someone might be by, but I knew that voice. They weren't coming. It kept raining that night. Thunder cracked so hard it shook the windows. I slept on the couch with the flashlight on, and the radio turned low, but I didn't get much sleep. Every time lightning lit up the street, I checked to see if he was still there, and he always was. Still sitting, still waiting. The next morning, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and I made a decision. I dragged my old canoe out from under the porch. It hadn't seen water in 10 years, and the bottom was dotted with spider webs and pine needles. I cleared it out, tested the balance, and found the paddle. My hands were shaking. When I pushed off from the curb, I wasn't sure what I thought would happen. Maybe he'd run. Maybe he'd growl. But I had to try. It took me 20 minutes to get to the Jenkins house. The street was a silent lagoon, the tops of stop signs poking out of the water like strange weeds. I passed by my neighbors' homes, windows dark, doors swollen shut. The whole place felt hushed, like it was holding its breath. When I reached the dog, he stood up, just like that. Not a bark, not a whimper. He stood up and inched toward the edge of the roof. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice low and calm. "It's okay, buddy. Let me get you down." He tilted his head, just slightly. Then he looked past me. I turned, but the water was empty behind me. Still, he kept looking. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked. That's when I saw it. A tattered leash still clipped to his collar, dragging behind him. It had snagged on a branch at the edge of the roof. I pulled closer, tied off the canoe to a drain pipe, and started climbing the ladder I'd brought with me. Each rung creaked under my weight. The dog didn't move. I was close enough now to see that his paws were raw. He'd been pacing, waiting. I reached the top and crouched slowly. He sniffed the air but didn't back away. just stayed there, watching. "I'm not gonna hurt you," I said. "Let's get you out of here." It took a minute, but he let me clip the leash. I guided him down, rung by rung, coaxing gently. He trembled, but he followed. Back in the canoe, he curled up immediately, nose tucked under his tail. I paddled us home. He didn't look back. I named him Scout. Over the next few days, the rain stopped. The waters started to go down slowly. I kept Scout inside with me. Gave him warm towels, leftover chicken, a dry corner of the rug. He hardly ate at first. Just stared at the door like he still thought someone would walk through it. I put up posters, made calls, posted online. Nothing. No one came for him. But Scout stayed. He followed me around the house, his nails clicking on the hardwood. Slept at the foot of my bed. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the front door, ears perked. Other times, he'd curl beside my chair while I read, his breathing slow and even. 2 weeks after the flood, I was outside pulling debris from the yard when a white pickup rolled up to the curb. A man climbed out, late 30s, pale, tall, dressed in work boots and a damp flannel shirt. He had a clipboard in one hand and mud on his jeans. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his cap, "doing a sweep for FEMA. Mind if I ask how you're holding up?" I gave him the usual rundown. Power still iffy, roof held, yard a mess. He nodded, making notes. Then Scout came trotting around the side of the house. The man froze. "That your dog?" I shook my head. "No. Found him stranded after the storm. Brought him in, nobody's claimed him." He crouched down and looked at Scout. Scout wagged his tail once but didn't move closer. "Looks like a golden mix," the man said. "Maybe some shepherd in him. Looks healthy now. You did good." "I think he's waiting on someone," I said quietly. "He looks out the window all the time." The man sighed, straightened up. "A lot of pets got left behind. Some folks didn't have time. Others couldn't bring them. They tried to mark houses with notes. Didn't always work out." He handed me a small slip of paper with a website on it. "Try there. Lost and Found Registry for Animals. Photos, microchip matches, the works." I thanked him, and he drove off. That night, I sat with Scout on the porch. The water was mostly gone now, just soggy ground and scattered leaves. The air smelled like mildew and wet pine. "You got someone looking for you?" I asked. He pressed his head against my knee. I took a picture of him the next morning and uploaded it to the site. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got an email. It was from a woman named Maggie Hart. She wrote that her parents lived on Oakley Street, 2 houses down from me. They'd passed during the flood, both taken by the water. The house had filled fast. She'd barely escaped. Her dog, Boomer, had slipped from his leash in the chaos. She hadn't been able to find him after the rescue boat came. She'd feared the worst. She sent photos, same eyes, same golden coat, same little scar on the left ear. It was him. I stared at the email for a long time. Scout, Boomer, was lying at my feet. I replied and gave her my number. The phone rang an hour later. Her voice trembled. "Is he okay?" "He's more than okay," I said. "He's been waiting." She cried. Told me how her parents had adopted him from a shelter 3 years ago. How he'd always been calm, loyal, never barked unless he had to. He had slept on her dad's side of the bed when her mom went into hospice. She said she didn't know if she could take him now. Her apartment didn't allow dogs. She was between jobs. Things were hard. I understood. You don't have to decide right now, I told her. He's safe. Take your time. We hung up, and I looked down at him. He looked up at me. Scout or Boomer, I said. Looks like you're home for now. I didn't expect what happened next. A week later, Maggie showed up. She'd driven from Baton Rouge, said she needed to see him. The moment she stepped out of her car, he barked. First time I ever heard him bark. He ran to her like a child to their mother. She knelt, arms wide, tears falling. He buried his head against her chest and shook. She stayed the weekend. We talked for hours about her parents, the flood, life, about the kindness of strangers. She said she couldn't take him now, but maybe someday. I said that was fine. Scout stayed. But things had changed. He didn't watch the door as much anymore. He played in the yard. He chased butterflies. And every Sunday, like clockwork, Maggie came back to visit. We never said the word adoption, but we didn't have to. Scout had developed a habit of sitting by the garden gate each morning. Not waiting, exactly, just watching. His ears would twitch with the morning breeze, and his gaze would drift across the road as if remembering the floodwaters that once coursed down it. Some days, he'd rise and sniff at the air before turning back and padding over to lie beside my rocker on the porch. We'd sit together, watching the town piece itself back together. Life in Hollow Creek was slow to recover. The hardware store opened first, then the diner. The post office was still closed, and mail came twice a week if we were lucky. Neighbors came and went, clearing out mud, patching roofs, stringing up tarps. Some left entirely. The Jenkins house, where Scout had waited, stayed empty. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for long. Every few days, Maggie would drive in from Baton Rouge. She always brought something: a bag of dog treats, a new leash, a photo of her parents. She'd sit on the steps with Scout, run her hand along his back, and talk in a soft voice that I usually tried not to overhear. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried. Scout listened. He was a good listener, always had been. You could talk to him about anything, and he'd just sit there, ears relaxed, tail tapping softly. I'd grown used to his presence in my house, used to his heavy paws on the hardwood at night, the sound of him stretching when he woke up, the warmth of his back against my calves as I sipped coffee. But I also knew he wasn't really mine. One Saturday, Maggie showed up later than usual. She looked tired. Her car had a crack in the windshield, and her blouse was wrinkled like she'd pulled it from a laundry pile. "Hey," she said, stepping out. "Mind if I stay a little longer today?" "Of course," I said. "Come on in." Scout was already at the gate, tail wagging. He trotted up and nuzzled her hand. She gave him a weary smile and scratched behind his ears. We sat on the porch. She pulled out a thermos and poured us both some lukewarm coffee. "You okay, hun?" I asked. She nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. "Just life, you know. Got laid off last week. They're cutting hours all over. Rent's late. My aunt's in the hospital in Shreveport. I've been running all over." Scout rested his chin on her knee. "I keep thinking about moving back," she said. "But there's nothing here anymore. The house is gutted. The memories are hard." I nodded slowly. "I can't take him yet," she added quickly, like she thought I was about to ask. "I want to. God, I want to. But I just can't." "You don't have to explain," I said. "He's safe here. We're fine." She looked at me then. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a quiet gratitude in them that I understood. "Thank you," she said. We didn't say much after that. just listened to the rustling trees and the hum of crickets. Scout dozed, his breath deep and even. Later that evening, after she left, I found him in the hallway, staring at the spot where her shoes had been. He sighed and lay down. That night, I made up my mind. Scout needed a job. Not a real one, obviously, but something to do, something to focus on besides waiting. The next morning, I called the local elementary school. It had reopened last week in the church basement while repairs continued. I spoke to Miss Connie, the principal. "Therapy dog," she said. "We haven't had one of those, but Lord knows these kids could use it. We've got children who lost everything, parents, homes, pets. Some of them haven't smiled in weeks." I told her Scout was gentle, calm, didn't jump or bark. She said to bring him in Friday. Scout seemed unsure at first, nose twitching as we walked into the basement classroom. It smelled like glue and graham crackers. Kids turned and stared. One little girl shrieked and hid under her desk. "It's okay," I said, patting Scout's side. "He's friendly." We sat in the reading corner. Miss Connie brought over a group of kids, cautiously. One boy with a Batman backpack reached out and touched Scout's ear. Scout didn't move. Just let the boy explore. Soon, others came. Fingers stroked his back, tugged gently at his tail. A girl read a picture book aloud while Scout lay still, eyes half closed. By the end of the hour, even the girl who'd screamed was curled beside him, tracing her finger along the fur on his leg. Miss Connie beamed. "You're welcome anytime." We went every Friday after that. Scout knew the way. His tail would start wagging as we turned onto the church road. The kids made drawings of him, which they gave me with sticky fingers and proud smiles. One morning, a boy named Eli whispered to me, "I like Scout better than people." I nodded. "I do too." In the afternoons, we'd stop by the diner. Marlene always gave Scout a piece of bacon and told him he was the best-looking gentleman she'd seen all week. He'd sit beside my feet while I sipped sweet tea, his eyes drifting shut. Maggie kept coming, but less often. She called more. We talked about Scout, about her job search, about her aunt's recovery. She was trying, and that counted for something. Then came the phone call. It was early evening, and I was folding laundry when the phone rang. "Ruthie," Maggie said, her voice shaking. "I got the job. And an apartment. Pet-friendly. It's small, but it's safe. I think I can bring him home." I looked at Scout, asleep on the rug. "When?" I asked. "2 weeks. I'll come get him then. I'll have everything ready." I said congratulations. I meant it. But something in my chest felt tight. Those next 2 weeks were strange. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The exact pattern of white on Scout's paws. The way he groaned softly when stretching. The thump of his tail when I opened the fridge. I made him special meals. Rice and chicken, carrots and sweet potatoes. He sniffed them politely and ate with contentment. We took longer walks. I let him sleep on the bed. One night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the porch. Scout followed. We sat in silence. "You excited?" I asked. He yawned and laid his head on my foot. "She loves you. She really does. And you loved her too. You waited on that roof. You knew she was out there." His tail moved once. "I just want you to be happy," I whispered. 2 days before Maggie was due, we made our usual visit to the school. The kids were extra lively. One boy had brought in his guinea pig. Scout watched with mild interest. Miss Connie pulled me aside. "I heard Scout might be leaving us soon," she said. "Yes, his old owner's ready to take him back. She nodded. We'll miss him, but I'm glad he gets to go home. Home. That word sat heavy. We left a little later than usual. The kids gave Scout a card with crayon hearts and "We love you" scrawled in block letters. He carried it in his mouth all the way to the car. When we got home, I pinned it to the fridge. That night, I got another call. Not from Maggie, from an unknown number. A man's voice. Police officer. Maggie had been in a car accident. Rainy highway. A truck lost control. She was in the hospital, alive but unconscious. I hung up and sat very still. Scout came over and rested his head on my lap. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. He wasn't going anywhere just yet. The hospital was 3 hours away in Lafayette, and I wasn't sure I should even go. Maggie was in the ICU, heavily sedated, hooked to machines that clicked and hummed through the night. She couldn't take visitors, at least not ones she would recognize. But the voice on the phone, the officer, he said I was the closest thing they had to family right now. Her aunt was too frail to travel. There wasn't anyone else. So the next morning, I left Scout with Marlene at the diner. She loved him, and he loved her bacon. And I made the drive with the windows down, trying not to think too hard. The hospital smelled like bleach and distant sorrow. Nurses moved with purpose, their shoes whispering against linoleum floors. I gave my name and was led to a waiting room. A doctor came to speak with me. Young, kind eyes, calm voice. Maggie had a broken rib, a concussion, bruising on her lungs. She'd wake eventually, probably soon, but her recovery would be slow. She's lucky, he said. Seatbelt saved her life. I sat in the quiet for a while, unsure what to do next. When I finally peeked into her room, I only stayed a minute. Machines beeped steadily. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, her hair splayed across the pillow. I whispered that Scout was okay, that he was waiting. When I got back to Hollow Creek, it was late afternoon. The sky had turned a deep gold. Scout was sitting beside the diner's screen door, tail wagging slow and steady. He stood when he saw me. I crouched down and rubbed behind his ears. She's gonna be okay, I said. But it'll be a while. He nudged my chest with his nose and gave a soft huff. I took that as understanding. Over the next few days, I kept busy. Marlene dropped off casseroles. Miss Connie called to check in. The kids at school sent a get well card shaped like a flower, with every petal holding a crayon-drawn face. Scout seemed to sense something had changed. He stayed close, rarely leaving my side. When I sat on the porch, he sat too. When I went to the mailbox, he followed. At night, he curled beside the bed and pressed against the mattress. He didn't look at the door anymore. Not as much. On the 5th day, Maggie woke up. The nurse called and said she was groggy but asking for me. So I drove down again, and this time, when I peeked through the doorway, her eyes were open. "Hey there," I said. She smiled faintly. Is he okay?" "He's fine," I said. "He misses you." She nodded and closed her eyes for a moment. "I was coming to get him," she whispered. "I know. I still want to, just not yet. You just focus on getting better." That night, I got home late. Scout was waiting on the porch. When I sat down, he laid his head on my knee, and I felt the weight of everything settle into place. In the weeks that followed, we settled into something like a rhythm. Maggie remained in rehab for nearly a month, learning to walk without pain, easing back into speech and movement. We talked every few days. She asked about Scout, and I told her everything. The kids at school, his new love of ice cubes, how he'd taken to chasing the shadow of the ceiling fan like a pup. One morning I brought him back to the school. The children squealed with delight. They'd made a banner that said, "Welcome back, Scout," in crooked, glittery letters. He stood tall in front of it, wagging his tail like a little celebrity. Eli made him a paper crown. Miss Connie pulled me aside. "He makes them feel safe," she said, "like there's something good still here." I looked over at him, surrounded by sticky fingers and snack crumbs. "He's good for me too," I said. By then, the Jenkins house had been sold. A young couple from Baton Rouge had moved in, a teacher and a mechanic, hopeful and bright-eyed. They planted wildflowers in the front yard. I helped them one Saturday, shoveling earth and sharing lemonade. They asked about the neighborhood, about the storm, about the dog they'd heard rumors of, the one who waited on the roof. I told them what I knew. They cried. Scout sat in the shade, watching. Maggie came home the second weekend of April, not to pick him up, just to visit. She was thinner, still sore, moving slower, but she smiled easily, and her voice was steadier. She spent the whole afternoon with Scout. They walked around the block, and she brought his favorite treats. At one point, they sat in the grass behind the house, faces turned toward the sun. I watched from the window, feeling something bittersweet settle in my chest. When she came back inside, she stood in the doorway, hands in her pockets. "I don't know if I can take him," she said softly. "You don't have to decide right now." She looked at me. "I mean ever." I didn't say anything. I thought I wanted to, and maybe I still do, and I see him here with you, with the school, with this town. He's happy, he's needed. She rubbed her eyes and gave a small laugh. Every time I see him, he feels less like mine, like he's found something new. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'll always love him," she said. "But maybe love isn't always about holding on." That night, I let Scout sleep in the bed with me. He stretched out, sighed, and was asleep within minutes. I stared at the ceiling a long time. The days grew warmer. Fireflies returned. The diner added outdoor seating, and Scout had his own water bowl under my usual table. Children rode bikes again. Flowers bloomed, and Maggie kept visiting. Sometimes she brought cookies, sometimes just herself. She helped out at the school, read stories, taught the kids how to fold origami. She never missed a Friday. Scout waited by the gate until she came. They had a new rhythm now. She would walk him to the end of the block and back. Then they'd sit under the sycamore tree and watch the clouds roll past. One afternoon, a storm rolled in faster than expected. I was in the kitchen when the thunder cracked. The lights flickered. Rain came down in sheets. Scout ran to the back door, whining. I followed him. Outside, Maggie was still in the yard, soaked to the bone, trying to pull the clothesline down before it snapped in the wind. Scout pushed past me, bolted into the yard, and ran to her. She laughed, drenched and smiling, and dropped the rope to hug him tight. Later, wrapped in towels and sipping tea, she said, "He still knows when to come for me." I looked at her. "So do you." The storm passed and the sky cleared. That weekend, we planted marigolds. The kids from school had given us seedlings in old yogurt containers. We dug little holes, and Scout nosed the dirt helpfully, nearly tipping the wheelbarrow twice. Maggie looked peaceful, her hands covered in soil, her sleeves rolled up. I saw the way she watched Scout, not like someone trying to reclaim something lost, but like someone admiring a new chapter. That evening, I found her standing in the hallway, looking at the old photograph I kept on the wall. It was a picture of my husband, Jack, holding our first dog, a border collie named Daisy. She was licking his cheek, and he was laughing like he'd won the lottery. "He looks like someone who loved deeply," she said. "He did," I said, "and lost just as deeply." She turned to me. "But he still smiled like that." I nodded. "Because of her, because of Daisy." Scout wandered in, ears perked. He nuzzled her hand. She looked down and smiled. "You saved him," she said. "I think he saved me." That night, I slept soundly. For the first time in a long while, there were no dreams of floods or empty streets, just soft paws, gentle breath, and the steady beat of something whole. Scout took to summer like a fish to water. He sprawled under the porch shade during the hottest part of the day and chased after butterflies in the early morning dew. I'd leave the back door open and find him sniffing around the wild mint that had sprouted along the edge of the fence. He became a fixture of the neighborhood, a presence people waved to from their porches, a tail wag behind every walk. The school let out for summer break in June, and with the children gone, Fridays grew quiet. Scout would still pace by the front gate every Friday morning, his head tilting whenever a car passed. When none of them stopped, he'd eventually lie down beside my chair and snooze through the heat. One Friday, just as I was starting to think about making lunch, there was a knock on the door. Maggie stood there with 2 canvas bags and a bright smile. "I figured he might miss the kids," she said, and held up a stack of laminated books and crayons. "So I thought maybe we could go visit the retirement home." That was how it started. The next week, she set it up. We brought Scout to the Sunny Pines home just outside of town. It was clean, cheerful, full of quilts and quiet shuffling. The residents lit up the moment they saw him. He went from room to room, resting his head in laps, letting fingers comb through his fur. One man told us he'd had a dog just like Scout during the Korean War. A woman named Edna showed us a photo of her golden retriever from 1971, and then insisted Scout stay beside her while she told him all about her children. He listened. That's what he did best. We made it a weekly thing. Fridays became Scout's rounds. The staff even made him a badge, laminated, crooked, with his name and a sticker of a paw print. He wore it on his collar. Maggie came with me every time. We'd stop for coffee before, and usually grab groceries after. There was an ease between us now, like we'd been doing this for years. Scout rode in the back seat, head out the window, ears flapping in the breeze. One day, we pulled up to the market and saw a girl sitting out front with a cardboard sign. She looked maybe 17, thin, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, eyes wary. Her sign said, "Just need gas to get home." Maggie reached into her bag and handed me a 20. "You go ahead," she said. "I'll stay here with her." Inside, I shopped quick. When I came back out, the girl was smiling, and Scout was licking her cheek. She giggled and wiped her face with her sleeve. "She's from Monroe," Maggie told me. "Got stranded when her ride bailed. She's got family up north waiting on her. I called the shelter. They'll help her get a bus ticket." I handed the girl a cold sandwich and a bottle of water. She took it with tears in her eyes. "Your dog," she whispered. "He made me feel safe." I looked at Scout. He was watching the girl carefully, his body still. "He has a way of knowing who needs him," I said. Later that night, Maggie and I sat on the back porch with the citronella candles burning low. The cicadas had taken up their evening songs, and Scout lay stretched out between our chairs, belly to the cool wood. "You know," she said, twirling her iced tea glass, "I think he's a healer." I nodded. He was made for this. He waits for people, and then he stays until they're ready. We sat in silence a while. "I was angry for so long," Maggie said softly. "At myself, at the world, at the flood. But seeing him, it helped. Because he waited. And he didn't blame me." Scout shifted in his sleep and gave a little snore. Maggie laughed gently. "He doesn't even know he's doing it. He just shows up, and people feel better." The next morning, we got a letter in the mailbox, handwritten, addressed to me. It was from Miss Connie. She was writing to thank us for Scout's visits. A parent of one of the students had reached out to her. Their daughter, Lily, had stopped having nightmares after the school year ended. She kept a drawing of Scout beside her bed and whispered to it every night. She said Scout helped her feel safe. The letter ended with, "Thank you for sharing him with us. He's more than a dog. He's a little miracle in fur." I read it aloud to Maggie, and we sat quiet for a long time afterward. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her purse. "I want to frame it," she said. "Maybe hang it up in the church nursery." Scout spent most of that week napping in the shade or lying in the hallway, belly to the tiles. But every time I reached for my keys or Maggie opened the car door, he jumped up, ready. We added new stops to his routine: the library, where he sat with toddlers during story time; the food pantry, where he greeted volunteers and occasionally snuck a cookie. He even visited the fire station one Saturday, after the chief's daughter requested it for her birthday. The fireman gave him a tiny red helmet. He wore it for 10 seconds before sneezing it off. Maggie started writing again. She'd always loved it, but hadn't touched her notebooks in years. Now, every Sunday morning, she brought her journal and wrote on the porch while Scout dozed beside her. She said it helped her find words again. That some days, she just wrote about the way Scout's ear flicked in his sleep, or how he chased sunbeams across the floor. One Sunday, she read aloud a piece she'd written. It was a short reflection, just a few paragraphs titled, "The Dog That Waited." It was simple, tender, and beautiful. When she finished, I clapped. "You should submit that somewhere," I said. She shook her head. "It's just for me, and for him." Scout yawned and rolled over, his legs twitching like he was chasing something in a dream. In July, Hollow Creek held its first community potluck since the flood. We set up tables in the town square, and folks brought whatever they could: casseroles, pies, baskets of biscuits. There was music, laughter, and the hum of something that felt like hope. Scout was the guest of honor. Someone had even made a sign. "Thank you, Scout, our hero." He wore a blue bandana and accepted pets from every corner. The children drew paw prints on the sidewalk in chalk, and Maggie organized a story circle where the kids shared their favorite memories of him. "My grandma says he's magic," one girl said. "She says he knows when people are sad." Another boy chimed in. "He came to our class and didn't even bark. He just looked at me and I felt better." An older woman from the retirement home stood and told us that Scout had reminded her what it felt like to be seen. "He looked at me like I was still somebody," she said. By the end of the night, Scout was stretched out under the dessert table, snoring softly. I sat beside him with a lemonade in hand, and Maggie leaned against my shoulder. "Look what he built," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The days rolled on. The summer heat peaked, and then slowly began to ease. Scout started shedding more and sleeping longer in the mornings. Maggie took on more hours at the library, helping with the kids' program. I noticed how often she brought Scout up in conversation with strangers, the way she smiled when someone asked about him. She didn't say the word mine, but she didn't need to. One morning in August, I woke up and Scout wasn't at the foot of the bed. My heart jumped. I checked the hallway, the porch, the kitchen. He was in the garden, lying among the marigolds, his head up, ears alert. Maggie was out there too, crouched beside him, brushing dirt from her hands. "Morning," she said. "He wanted to come out here." I nodded and sat on the step. The air was cool, almost autumn-like. Birds called to each other in the distance. "He watched me plant these," she said, "and now he guards them." Scout looked over at her and gave a little sneeze. That afternoon, we visited Sunny Pines. Edna had made him a scarf from old fabric scraps. He wore it proudly. We stayed longer than usual. Maggie read aloud from her notebook. Scout curled beside her chair, eyes closed. The residents clapped when she finished. Back in the car, she said, "Maybe I could write something bigger. A story. About him. About all of it." "I think you should." She didn't reply right away. Then she said, "I never would have healed without him." Neither would I thought. But I didn't say it aloud. That night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find Maggie standing there, holding her journal. "Can I read you something?" I nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed and read a passage titled, "The Space Between." It was about loss and waiting, about grief that lingers, and the quiet moments that begin to patch it. It was about a dog who didn't speak, but somehow said everything. When she finished, we sat in the hush. "Maybe love isn't about taking someone back," she said. "Maybe it's about seeing where they belong." Scout padded in and curled up at our feet. The ceiling fan turned slowly above us. The crickets began to sing. And somewhere in the garden, the marigolds swayed in the night breeze. The first cool morning of September slipped in without fanfare. The air held a kind of hush, like the town was waiting for something to begin. Dew clung to the grass, and the breeze that rustled through the trees brought with it the faintest scent of wood smoke. Scout stirred from his usual spot on the porch, lifted his head, sniffed once and sneezed softly. He'd grown fond of the front porch in recent weeks, especially at sunrise. He'd sit with his chin resting on the step, eyes open, ears flicking toward distant sounds. Maggie had started joining him with a cup of coffee in hand, bundled in a flannel robe she'd dug out of a forgotten box in her old house. This morning, I brought out a second mug and sat beside her. "Feels like change," I said. She nodded, watching the mist lift off the neighbor's yard. "Scout's been sniffing the air for 10 minutes. He knows something's coming." "He always does." Scout turned slightly at the sound of our voices, then let out a long sigh and closed his eyes again. The town was quieter now. Summer had given way to school routines, and the rebuilding process had slowed to a kind of settled patience. Most of the visible damage had been repaired. What remained was harder to fix: the missing neighbors, the empty lots, the new wariness when rain clouds gathered. Scout, in his quiet way, had become part of how people coped, not just for the kids or the retirees, but for the cashiers at the market, the pastor who started keeping treats behind the church pulpit, the librarian who once confessed she hadn't smiled in months until Scout fell asleep during a poetry reading. Maggie had started putting together a small book. Nothing official, just stories, memories, photos people emailed her or dropped off. Scout beside a sandbag wall, Scout curled up under a table at the church bake sale, Scout with a red balloon tied gently to his collar at a child's birthday. She named the folder on her laptop Scoutstown. One Saturday, she and I sat at the dining room table, sorting through envelopes filled with handwritten notes and snapshots. "This one's from the Thompsons," she said, holding up a picture. It showed Scout lying in their garden, their 2-year-old asleep against his side. "He stayed there for 2 hours while she napped," she read aloud from the note. "Didn't move a muscle, like he knew." "He did know," I said. There were dozens more. Scout outside the library, Scout licking an ice cream cone, Scout sitting attentively beside a wheelchair. Each came with a story. "I want to make copies," Maggie said. "Give them to the school, the diner, the senior home, maybe even the animal shelter." "That's a good idea." She smiled, her fingers lingering on a picture of Scout staring at a sunset. The next day, we returned to Sunny Pines for the first time in 2 weeks. They'd had a stomach bug sweep through, and visits were paused. Edna was waiting for us at the door with her walker and a tray of sugar cookies. "You missed his fans," she said. "Every day, someone asked if the mayor was coming back." "The mayor?" Maggie raised an eyebrow. "That's what we call him now. Everyone stops when he walks in." Scout wagged his tail once and sniffed the tray politely. They led us to the common room where chairs had already been arranged in a circle. The residents clapped when we entered, and Scout took his usual lap, greeting each person in turn. Maggie brought out a few of the photos and passed them around. "This one's my favorite," she said, holding up a picture of Scout with a little boy resting his head on his back. "That's Eli," I said. "He's the one who said Scout was better than people." They all laughed, a low, warm ripple of sound. Afterward, Maggie read one of her stories. The residents sat quiet, listening. Scout lay at her feet, breathing slow and deep. When she finished, a woman named Phyllis clapped and said, "You should publish that. More people need to read it." "I'm just collecting pieces," Maggie said. "I'm not sure what it is yet." "It's a blessing," Edna said. "That's what it is." On the way home, we stopped by the market. Maggie ran in to grab coffee filters, and I stayed in the car with Scout. I cracked the window, and he watched the people passing with calm interest. A boy walked up to the window, maybe 12 or 13, thin, nervous hands. "Is that the dog from the school?" he asked. I nodded. "That's him." The boy looked at Scout, then said, "He sat next to my sister when she was crying, at recess. Didn't move until she stopped." Scout looked at the boy, blinked once. "She got better after that," the boy said. Then he turned and walked away. That night, I told Maggie about the encounter. She added it to her notebook. "He's changing people," she said, "and he doesn't even know it." We spent the rest of September preparing for a town event. The Hollow Creek Harvest Picnic, held every year in the park by the river. Last year, it was canceled due to the flood. This year, they were determined to bring it back. Maggie helped organize the volunteers. I baked pies. Scout supervised. The day of the picnic, the weather was perfect. Bright sun, light breeze, No hint of rain. Tables were set up under the trees, booths lined the walkway, and the smell of grilled food drifted through the air. Scout wore his bandana. Maggie had sewn little patches onto it, tiny symbols for each place he visited. A book for the library, a heart for the senior home, a paw print for the school. Children ran up to pet him. Adults asked for photos. Someone had even made buttons that said, "I met Scout today." There was a moment, late in the afternoon, when I saw Scout lying under the shade of a magnolia tree while two toddlers sat beside him, giggling. One was braiding grass into his tail, the other was whispering something into his ear. Maggie stood beside me, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "You think he ever wonders why everyone loves him?" she asked. "He probably just thinks it's normal," I said. "He's always been like this." She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to write it down. All of it. Not just the stories from others. Ours too. How he waited. How he stayed. How he made people feel like they weren't alone. You should." "I don't know where to start." "Start at the roof," I said. That's where he began again. We went home that night with full bellies and tired smiles. Scout curled up at the foot of the bed, paws twitching in his sleep. A week later, Maggie had a printed manuscript. It wasn't bound, just pages in a folder. She handed it to me without a word and went to make tea. I read it that night. Every page. It was simple, but powerful, honest. The title was at the very top, "The Dog Who Waited." She returned as I finished the last page. "Well?" "It's beautiful," I said. "I want to give copies to the people who wrote letters, and maybe one to the town library. They'll love it." "I was thinking," she said, "maybe I could include a little about you too. You're part of his story. I'm just the one who paddled the canoe. You're the one who saw him first." We didn't say much after that. October brought chilly mornings and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Scout started sleeping curled tighter, his fur puffing slightly with each breath. We gave him a thicker blanket for the porch. One morning, I found him sitting beside the mailbox, tail thumping. Inside was a letter addressed to Maggie. She opened it slowly. "It's from a publisher," she whispered. They wanted to talk. They'd read the short version she'd submitted to a regional journal. They thought it had promise. They asked if she had more. She looked at me. "Do we?" I glanced at Scout. He was sniffing the edge of the porch like it was the most important task in the world. "Oh, we've got more." She spent the next 2 weeks revising, adding, shaping. I helped where I could. Dates, little memories, things she'd missed. The house was quiet in a focused sort of way. Scout seemed to sense the shift. He lay near her desk while she typed, occasionally resting his chin on her foot. The night she hit send, we ordered pizza and watched an old movie. Scout dozed between us on the couch, tail flicking at every dramatic music cue. Maggie leaned her head on my shoulder. "No matter what happens," she said, "I'm glad I wrote it." So am I. The next morning, we had a knock on the door. It was Edna from Sunny Pines. She'd taken a cab. "I wanted to give this to Scout," she said, "before I forget." It was a hand-stitched quilt. Tiny squares, each one decorated with a memory. Scout at the church, Scout with her walker, Scout under a tree. He sniffed it gently, then curled up right on top. She looked down at him and said, "Thank you, boy, for helping me feel seen again." Maggie helped her back to the cab. I watched from the porch as they hugged goodbye. Later that day, Scout sat by the porch and watched the wind move through the leaves. Maggie opened her notebook and started writing again. And I, once again, felt that familiar hush in the air, that quiet weight that meant change was coming. Scout raised his head and looked out at the road, just watching. The first frost came late that year. October stretched into November with golden light and mild winds, and the trees held onto their color like they weren't quite ready to let go. Scout had taken to curling near the fireplace now, resting his chin on the braided rug while his body soaked in the warmth. He moved a little slower in the mornings, stretched a little longer before rising. Maggie joked that he was becoming a gentleman of leisure. The manuscript had been accepted. Maggie got the email one bright morning while we were folding laundry. She opened her laptop, let out a small gasp, and dropped the dish towel. Scout, startled by the noise, ran in from the porch and looked between us. "They want to publish it," she said. "They're offering a real contract." I blinked. "Well, I hope they know who the real author is." She looked at Scout and laughed. "He'll want a cut of the royalties in treats." It all happened faster than we expected. The publisher sent forms and asked for more photos. Maggie spent hours organizing the chapters, reworking transitions and answering emails. I kept Scout busy. Walks in the early morning fog, trips to the diner where Marlene still kept bacon under the counter, visits to the school even though the kids were now tucked inside with coats and lunchboxes. They still remembered him. They always would. Miss Connie had added a framed drawing of Scout to the entrance hallway. It showed him lying under the reading rug, eyes closed, while stick-figure children clustered around him, their mouths open in cartoon smiles. The bottom of the drawing read, "Our friend." One afternoon, Maggie received a package from the publisher. Inside was a printed galley copy. The cover was soft matte, the title in simple block letters, and below it, a photograph I'd taken. Scout sitting on the front steps, looking out into the distance. She held it like it might break. "I didn't think this would ever happen," she whispered. I put the kettle on, and Scout climbed onto the rug beside her. She ran her fingers down the spine of the book, then opened to the first page. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she read aloud the dedication, "To the ones who waited and the ones who stayed." Scout barked softly, as if in approval. The publisher planned to release the book in February. They asked if Maggie could do a few local events leading up to it. Libraries, school groups, even a regional book fair over in Baton Rouge. She agreed, cautiously. She wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds, but she wanted people to hear the story the way it had lived in her heart, and she wanted Scout to be part of it. We got him a special harness with a patch that said Ambassador. He seemed indifferent to the title, more interested in the cheese cubes Maggie packed for his snacks. His first event was at the Hollow Creek Library. The reading room was full by the time we arrived. Teachers, kids, older couples in fleece jackets. Scout trotted in, tail wagging, and took his spot by Maggie's feet while she stood at the podium with the galley in hand. She began with the roof. "I want to tell you about the day he waited," she said. "Not knowing if anyone was coming, not knowing if he'd be seen. But still, he waited." The room was silent. Scout didn't move. Maggie read 2 chapters, then closed the book. People clapped, some teared up, and a little girl brought Scout a paper flower she'd folded herself. "I made it for him," she said, "for waiting so good." He took it gently from her hand and laid it on the floor beside him. After that came more events. Maggie spoke at the senior home, the local high school, even the church after Sunday service. Scout went everywhere with her, sitting patiently, receiving quiet praise and gentle strokes. People asked questions, how he was found, if he remembered Maggie's parents, what he liked to eat, what he did on quiet days. Maggie answered each one with care. "He likes routine," she said once, "and he likes kindness. He seems to know when people are holding something heavy inside them." The town started leaving little tokens for him on the front porch. Knitted scarves, tiny cookies, pine cones tied with ribbon. One morning, someone dropped off a collar charm shaped like a star. "I think he already knows he's won," Maggie said, attaching it with a soft smile. As winter drew closer, Scout's walks grew shorter. He seemed content to curl beside the fire and rest his head on his paws. But whenever we reached for his leash, he still rose, especially if it meant going with Maggie. She'd taken to writing again, not just about Scout, but about the town, the flood, the quiet healing that had spread from one porch to many. Her second notebook was filling fast. One cold morning, while Scout dozed by the heater, she turned to me. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" "Every day. If you hadn't looked through those binoculars, if you hadn't made it back to him." We didn't finish the sentences. We didn't need to. The last event before the holidays was held at the school. The children wore scarves and mittens, and Scout was given a seat on a red cushion at the front of the library. Maggie read the final chapter aloud, the one where Scout lay under the sycamore tree, watching the wind move through the marigolds. When she finished, the kids clapped and some stood to give her hugs. Scout received a peanut butter treat and a ribbon with gold stars drawn in marker. On the walk home, Maggie was quiet. "Everything feels like it's circling," she said, "coming back to where it began." The next few weeks were slow. We decorated the house for the holidays, strung lights across the fence, baked too many cookies. Scout received 4 Christmas cards addressed to him directly. One included a drawing of him flying through the sky like a reindeer. He took it in stride. Christmas morning was crisp and blue-skied. We gave Scout a new blanket, soft and embroidered with tiny paw prints. He sniffed it, turned in a circle, and plopped down with a grunt. Maggie made cinnamon rolls, and we ate them in the living room with hot cider. Scout lay between us, warm and content. "This is home," she said suddenly. I looked over. "Yes." She met my gaze. "Not just the house. This. All of this. What we built." Scout thumped his tail. The letter from the publisher arrived a week later. They were sending final copies. The book would launch in 2 weeks. They wanted a short interview video with Maggie and Scout for their website. She stared at the email for a long time, then turned to me. "You think he'll sit still long enough for a camera?" "He sat through a dozen story times and a school choir performance. I think he can handle a tripod." We filmed it on the porch. Maggie sat in the rocker, Scout beside her, and a local photographer asked questions, simple ones. How she met him, what he meant to the town, what she hoped readers would take away. She said, "I hope they see that even when everything feels lost, someone might still be waiting, and that waiting itself can be an act of hope." Scout laid his head on her foot and blinked slowly at the camera. The video was posted 3 days later. It reached thousands within hours. Comments poured in. Stories of lost dogs, found dogs, dogs who sat beside hospital beds, dogs who waited by the door. One comment read, "I didn't cry until the dog blinked." Another said, "I was that person holding something heavy, thank you." Maggie stayed up late reading each one. She smiled. She cried. She leaned down and pressed her cheek to Scout's shoulder. "You helped them," she whispered. Scout slept through it all. The night before the book launch, we sat in the living room with candles lit and music playing low. Maggie looked over at me. "Do you think they'll understand?" Who? The readers. The ones who weren't here. The ones who never saw him on the roof or watched him beside the children. I thought about it. They might not see what we saw, but they'll feel it. Because he left something behind in every word. And because you told the story with the same kindness he gave us. Scout let out a contented groan and rolled onto his side. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet and steady. We didn't speak again that night. There was nothing more to say. Only things to feel. The morning of the book launch dawned bright and cold, with snow still clinging in soft mounds along the roadsides and porches. Hollow Creek looked like a picture from a storybook, each rooftop dusted white, each tree branch lined in silver. Scout stirred early, pawing at the front door before sunrise, his breath visible as he stepped out into the crisp air. I followed him with a blanket over my shoulders, coffee in hand. He padded slowly across the yard and sat facing the street, watching nothing in particular. Maggie joined us a few minutes later, still in her slippers, a quiet hum beneath her breath as she leaned against the porch post. "You think he knows?" she asked. "About the book?" "About today. About all of it." Scout didn't turn his head. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of her voice. "I think he always knows," I said. The town bookstore, only recently reopened after months of repair, had offered to host the launch. It wasn't a large place. One room with shelves that leaned a little to the left, a counter that always smelled faintly of old paper, and a few armchairs scattered under reading lamps. But it was warm and full of memory, and that's what mattered. We arrived an hour early. Maggie carried a canvas bag of copies and bookmarks with Scout's face on them. Scout wore his ambassador harness and the knitted scarf Edna had made him, red with white trim. Inside, the shop was already bustling. Candles flickered in mason jars, cookies lined a folding table, and a local girl from the high school played soft guitar in the corner. The air buzzed with anticipation. The owner, Ms. Hartley, met us at the door. "He has a fan club," she whispered. "I've had people calling since 7 asking if he'll be here in person." "He insisted on attending," Maggie said with a smile. Scout circled the room once, greeting familiar faces with quiet joy. People crouched to rub his ears, murmured his name, thanked him like he had done something miraculous. In a way, he had. When the reading began, the little chairs and benches filled quickly. A few people stood near the back, peering over heads and camera phones. Maggie sat on a wooden stool with Scout curled beside her feet. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, she began. "I didn't plan to write a book. I didn't plan for any of this. But sometimes life gives us a moment that won't let go, and the only way to understand it is to write it down." She opened the book and read 3 short passages, one about the roof, one about the school, one about the quilt Edna made. Her voice never wavered. When she finished, the room was quiet for a beat longer than normal, as if everyone was holding something in their throat. Then they clapped. Some even stood. A little girl near the front leaned against her mother and whispered, "That's the dog from the church story." After the reading, Maggie signed copies while Scout napped under the table. She smiled for photos, chatted gently with each person, and accepted more hugs than she could count. I watched from the side, my heart full. When we got home, Scout trotted straight to the fireplace and flopped down with a grunt. Maggie poured 2 glasses of cider and collapsed into the armchair. "We did it," she said. "You did it," I said. "He inspired it." Outside, the sun began to dip. The sky turned amber, then rose gold, then blue. The next few weeks were quiet in comparison. The book traveled farther than we did. Copies mailed out, passed from hand to hand, carried to towns we'd never seen. Emails began arriving, messages from readers in other states. A teacher in Vermont who read it to her class. A man in Idaho who said the story reminded him of the dog who sat beside him during his chemotherapy. Scout's reach had grown beyond our little town, and yet, nothing about him changed. He still waited by the window at noon for the mail carrier, still nudged Maggie's hand when she lingered too long in thought, still curled beside the bed as the heater clicked on at night. The first real snow came in mid-January, heavy, slow flakes that blanketed the town for 2 full days. Schools closed. The diner stayed shuttered. The power flickered but held. Maggie and I spent the days cooking stew, reorganizing books, playing old music on the record player. Scout watched the snow from the window, his breath fogging the glass, his body still. Once Maggie opened the door to let in some air, and he stepped into the snow like he'd never seen it before. He stood in it, unmoving, for almost a full minute. Then he sneezed, shook off the flakes, and bounded forward with a sudden burst of joy. We laughed until our cheeks hurt. In February, the publisher sent news that the book had reached its 3rd printing. Maggie took it calmly, just smiled and said she was happy more people would hear the story. She didn't ask for press or attention. All she wanted was for people to remember the waiting, the watching, the stillness that somehow changed everything. Scout, true to form, greeted the news by licking her face and trotting back to his nap. We began planning a trip, Baton Rouge, then maybe Lafayette. 2 small signings, one reading at a library. Maggie agreed only if Scout could come. The publisher sent along travel arrangements and a stipend. Scout got a new carrier for the car, one with soft lining and plenty of room to stretch. He wasn't a fan of long rides. But with Maggie beside him and her hand resting on his back, he endured it. The first event was at a college campus. A quiet room, 20 folding chairs, soft lighting. Maggie spoke slowly, with Scout asleep beside her boots. Students listened with surprising attentiveness. One young woman approached after, tears in her eyes. "My sister passed last year," she said. "We had a dog. She used to say he understood her better than anyone. Your story made me remember her." Maggie hugged her. Neither said another word. The second event was larger. A community center in the heart of the city. Over 50 people. A camera crew from a local station. Scout stayed close the whole time, eyes never leaving Maggie. That night, in the hotel, Maggie knelt beside him. "I think they get it," she said. "I think they feel it now." Scout gave a low woof, then curled into a tight ball and fell asleep. We returned home to find a stack of mail and a basket on the porch. Inside were treats, dog toys, and a note that read, "Just a little thank you from a family who needed your story." Scout sniffed the basket once, picked out a rubber bone, and and carried it to his corner. As winter faded, the town began to thaw. Children returned to the park. Church bells rang again on Sundays. The trees budded with hints of green, and Scout, ever faithful, resumed his slow walks to the garden, his quiet afternoons by the porch, and his evenings curled between us. Maggie kept writing, not just stories about Scout, but about the town, about the people, about how healing sometimes looks like silence and sometimes looks like a dog waiting on a rooftop. One evening, she looked up from her notebook. "You ever wonder what he remembers?" "All of it," I said. "Or maybe just the parts that mattered." She nodded. "The waiting, the rescuing, the quiet. The love," she smiled. "Always the love." Scout lifted his head briefly, yawned, and laid it back down. The dusk grew deeper. The crickets began to hum, and the stars, slowly, quietly, returned to the sky. It was spring again in Hollow Creek, and the air held that delicate promise only April could offer. The scent of damp soil, the hum of bees waking from winter, the first fragile blossoms clinging to the trees like small, brave declarations. The sidewalks dried faster now. The breeze through the windows carried birdsong, and in the front yard, the marigolds bloomed early. Scout had slowed down, not all at once, but enough to notice. His steps were more careful, his naps more frequent, and his eyes, though still bright, had a softness to them now. He didn't chase the butterflies this year, only watched them. Maggie noticed it first. "He didn't come to the gate this morning," she said quietly over coffee. I looked out the window. Scout was curled up beneath the porch swing, head on his paws, his breathing even. "Maybe he's just tired." She nodded, but didn't speak. The vet came later that week for a checkup. Scout didn't protest, just let the woman feel his ribs, look into his eyes, listen to his chest. "He's old," she said gently, "and he's lived a big life this past year. His heart sounds good, but don't be surprised if he starts slowing down more. Give him rest, keep him warm, let him be near you." That was easy. He was always near us. He followed Maggie when she carried laundry, rested his head on my slippers while I read. He moved from room to room like a quiet, watchful spirit. Still there, still listening. The book had reached its 6th printing. A small publishing house in Europe bought the rights to translate it. Letters arrived from as far as Argentina and Norway. A group of children in Japan sent watercolor paintings of Scout, each one wrapped in tissue paper and sealed with stickers. Scout watched us open them, gave each painting a single sniff, then settled beside the box. Maggie hung them along the hallway. Every time she walked past, she touched one lightly with her fingers. The town held another picnic in May. Less formal than the harvest event, more casual. Families gathered by the river. There was music again, homemade food, kids with grass-stained knees and wind-blown hair. Scout sat beside our blanket, watching everything. A toddler toddled over with a cracker and tried to feed it to him. He licked the boy's hand and turned his head gently away. An older woman leaned over to pat his back. "He's the one, isn't he? From the book?" "He is," I said. She smiled. "Then he already knows." We stayed until the sun dipped below the horizon, the light gold and low. Scout didn't nap that day. He sat upright beside Maggie, his head leaning gently against her shoulder. The next few weeks moved quietly. Maggie taught a writing class at the library, helped organize a youth poetry event. I planted tomatoes and washed the windows. Scout slept more, but he always opened one eye when Maggie walked into a room. One morning, just after sunrise, I found her standing at the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. Scout lay at her feet, tail curled around his side. She looked at me and smiled faintly. "I dreamt about the roof last night." "The day you found him?" "No, the day I lost him." I stepped beside her. He was looking at me. Same eyes, just watching. Like he knew I had to go, but he wanted me to see that he'd wait. Scout stirred then, stretched, and let out a quiet sound that wasn't quite a bark, wasn't quite a sigh. We stayed out there for over an hour, watching the street slowly wake. Later that week, we visited Sunny Pines. Edna had knitted another blanket, this one smaller, in golden tones that matched Scout's coat. She draped it over his back and said, "There, now you match the sun." He rested his chin on her lap and didn't move for 20 minutes. They all noticed he was quieter. Not sad, not sick, just quieter, more inward, like he was listening to something far away. We didn't go to as many events after that. Maggie declined most of the invitations. She said she wanted to stay home, finish the second book. But I knew it was more than that. She wanted to stay near him. Every evening we sat on the porch. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Scout always lay between us. The marigolds in the garden were beginning to fade, petals curling at the edges, stems bending. One evening, she reached down and stroked his fur for a long time. "You changed everything," she whispered. The last letter arrived in June. It came in a pale blue envelope with handwriting that leaned to the right. Inside was a single page. It read, "Dear Scout, I don't know you, but I read your story. I wanted to give up last week. It had been a long year. But then I read about you, about how you waited, and I thought, if you could do it, maybe I could too. So I waited one more day, and the next day was better. You don't know me, but I needed to tell you. You saved me. Thank you for waiting. Love, someone who needed you." Maggie read it 3 times. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her notebook. That night, Scout didn't eat much. He curled up in the hallway and stayed there until morning. When I checked on him, his eyes blinked open and he thumped his tail twice. The next day, he didn't rise from his blanket. Maggie lay beside him on the floor, one hand on his chest. We didn't go anywhere that day. We didn't make calls or answer the door. We sat with him, told him stories, read from the book, held his paws. Just before the sun set, he lifted his head one last time and looked out the window. Then he closed his eyes. The silence that followed was full. Not empty, just full. Of memory, of love, of everything we had seen together. We buried him beneath the sycamore tree, the one where he used to sit with the children, the one where he chased the shadows of leaves. Maggie placed the quilt Edna made around him. I tucked in the letter. People came, quietly, gently, with food and flowers and soft words. The children drew pictures. The church bell rang once. In the weeks that followed, the world felt different, not lesser, just quieter, like something sacred had passed through. Maggie finished the second book in August. She called it The Dog Who Stayed. It was about all the days after. The letters, the visits, the quiet acts of kindness Scout inspired. She wrote about what it meant to be part of a town that remembered. We still sat on the porch in the evenings. Sometimes we still looked for him out of habit. But then we'd remember he was here, in the marigolds, in the wind, in the space between. The kids still talked about him. The teachers still told his story. And every now and then, someone new would come to town with a copy of the book in their bag. They always asked the same thing. Did he really wait there? On the roof? We always said yes, and we always smiled. Because he had. Because he had waited. And then he stayed.